The story of Monica Caudry began like the first light after a long night, soft, golden, and full of promise. In the heart of Lagos, where honking cars met morning prayers, stood a white-walled mansion at the edge of Victoria Garden City. It was not just a house. It was a monument of hope, the kind that grows only after years of pain. For 15 years, Chief and Mrs. Caudry waited for a child. 15 years of hospital corridors and silent dinners. 15 years of mockery whispered behind painted smiles. They prayed, they hoped, and they wept, until science at last became mercy. When the doctor told them the IVF had succeeded, Grace Caudry dropped to her knees right there in the hospital hallway, weeping into her husband's hands. And when Monica was born 9 months later, her father, the man everyone called Chief, broke down beside the hospital bed. Tears ran down his face as he whispered, "You are our answered prayer." From that day, Monica wasn't just a child. She was the miracle that erased 15 years of shame. Grace treated her like something heaven might take back if she blinked too long. Chief, though busy with business and politics, made time to hold her every night before she slept. He would hum her lullabies about patience, promise, and love that endures. As the years passed, their home filled with laughter again. The empty spaces that once echoed with grief now rang with the sound of a little girl's voice reading aloud from her schoolbooks. Monica grew like sunlight breaking through clouds. She was small, bright-eyed, and brilliant, the type of child teachers remembered even years later. At school, she always topped her class. At home, she filled every corner with questions and laughter. Sometimes, Grace would pause while cooking, just to listen to her daughter humming in the garden. "She's everything we prayed for," she'd whisper to herself. Chief often called her "my little professor." Whenever he returned from a trip, she would run to him shouting, "Daddy, what did you bring for me?" And he would lift her high, laughing, "A hug first, my sunshine, then the gifts." Their happiness became a story people talked about. The Caudrys were not just rich. They were loved. Neighbors admired them, friends envied them, and even strangers blessed them. On Monica's 6th birthday, the mansion came alive with balloons and music. The air smelled of jollof rice and roasted chicken. Children from the neighborhood danced in the courtyard. Grace wore a soft blue lace gown, her eyes shining with pride. But the greatest joy came when a black SUV rolled into the compound, and Chief Caudry stepped out, freshly arrived from London. "Daddy!" Monica squealed, racing across the yard. He barely managed to drop his travel bag before she leapt into his arms. He laughed, spinning her around. "My sunshine. I told you I'd make it before your birthday." He had been away for 2 long years, working day and night to secure their relocation papers to the UK. He wanted Monica to grow up in a safer world, one with better schools, cleaner streets, and brighter dreams. And now everything was ready. Grace joined the embrace, tears glistening. "You're home," she whispered. Chief kissed her forehead. "For good," he said. "For our family." That night, laughter returned to the mansion. Music. Dance. Oh. It was the kind of evening that makes you forget sorrow exists. If you're watching this right now, take a moment. Because sometimes, just when life feels perfect, destiny whispers another story. And if you believe that every light has its shadow, please subscribe. Stay with us. You'll need strength for what comes next. 2 weeks later, the sun rose differently. Chief had attended a family burial in Ibadan. He promised Grace he'd return that evening. "Before Monica finishes dinner," he said, smiling. By nightfall, the rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops on the mansion's wide windows. Monica sat by the window with her crayons, drawing her family under a bright rainbow. "I'll show Daddy when he comes back," she whispered. Grace prepared his favorite meal, pounded yam and egusi soup. The clock struck 9. Then 10, then midnight, and still no headlights at the gate. When the knock finally came, it was slow and hesitant. Grace opened the door expecting her husband's familiar grin. But standing there were two police officers, rain dripping from their caps. Their eyes said everything before their mouths could. Madam Grace Caudry. Yes. There was an accident along the expressway. Her voice broke. Where is my husband? Silence. Just the sound of rain, heavy and cruel. By morning, Lagos woke to the news. Chief Caudry's car had collided with a truck returning from Ibadan. 4 people were gone, including Monica's father. Grace's scream inside the hospital corridor could be heard down the street. She fought to enter the emergency ward even after they covered his body. Doctors tried to calm her. Nurses wept beside her. And somewhere in that chaos, a little girl stood in her school uniform, clutching her drawing, too young to understand the word dead, too shocked to cry. Days became a blur of mourning and murmurs. Relatives came from everywhere, cousins she'd never met, uncles who spoke like strangers. They filled the house with fake sympathy and long faces, whispering behind closed doors. Grace sat motionless, staring at the door her husband would never open again. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Monica kept bringing her water. Mummy, Daddy will wake up soon, right? Grace's lips trembled, but no sound came out. The miracle child, the one who brought life into that house, now wandered its halls like a ghost. At night, Monica tiptoed into her parents' room. The bed was neatly made. The air smelled like his cologne, warm, familiar, gone. She found his framed photograph on the dresser. In it he was smiling, strong, full of life. She picked it up with both hands, pressing it against her chest. Her small voice trembled. Daddy, she whispered, will you still come for my birthday next year? The only reply was silence, and the slow patter of rain against the window. The Caudry mansion, once full of laughter and light, had become a museum of silence. Curtains stayed drawn. The piano in the living room gathered dust. Every morning, the smell of flowers from the courtyard mixed with the quiet ache of loss. Grace Caudry, once elegant, admired and full of life, now moved through her own home like a ghost. Always dressed in black. Always quiet. Her footsteps echoed through empty corridors that once held her husband's laughter and her daughter's songs. She no longer sat in the garden. She no longer visited friends. Even the housemaids had learned not to ask questions. The only sound that reminded the world she was still alive came from her daughter's soft voice in prayer. God, please make my mummy happy again. Monica had become her mother's heartbeat, the one fragile thread keeping Grace from completely breaking. Every day, Grace looked at her daughter and saw her husband's eyes. It was comforting and painful all at once. At night, they would eat together in silence. 2 plates, 2 spoons, no laughter. Sometimes, Monica would rest her head on her mother's lap. Grace would stroke her hair and whisper, Daddy would be proud of you. But grief is a slow poison. It eats quietly, and by the time you notice, it's already too late. One humid afternoon, Grace fainted in the kitchen. The housemaid screamed. Monica came running. Mummy! Mummy, please wake up. The driver rushed her to the hospital. Doctors ran tests, whispering in corners, exchanging those looks people fear most. When Grace finally opened her eyes, she was surrounded by machines and the scent of antiseptic. A nurse smiled weakly. Madam, you need to rest. But Grace saw the doctor's face, and knew. Days later, she sat quietly on her hospital bed, holding Monica's hand. Monica, she said softly, do you remember when Daddy used to call you Sunshine? Monica nodded, eyes wide. Grace smiled faintly. Keep shining for me, okay? That evening, the doctor called her aside. The words came like thunder in slow motion. Breast cancer. Stage 3. Aggressive. Her world tilted again, this time without warning, without mercy. The treatments began. Chemo. Weight loss. Every strand of her beautiful hair fell away like dust in the wind. But Monica never left her side. She was only 8, but she carried herself like a woman twice her age. She learned to mix her mother's medicine, wipe her sweat, and whisper verses of hope. When Grace couldn't eat, Monica fed her spoon by spoon. When Grace couldn't sleep, Monica sang the lullabies her father once sang to her. Months became years. Hospitals replaced birthdays. The smell of disinfectant replaced perfume. The mansion that once hosted parties now smelled of pills and tears. Grace tried to hide her pain, but Monica saw everything. The winces when she coughed. The shaking hands that clutched the Bible. The muffled sobs in the middle of the night when she thought Monica was asleep. But the little girl never gave up. She prayed harder than most adults do. Every night, she knelt by her mother's bed, whispering, "God, please heal her. I don't need toys. I just need my mummy." One day, Grace smiled weakly and said, "Monica, come here." The girl climbed onto the bed, resting her head against her mother's chest. "Promise me something," Grace whispered. "Promise me you'll be strong no matter what happens." Monica's eyes filled with tears. "But Mummy, you're going to be fine." Grace looked away, her voice breaking. "Just promise me." "I promise," Monica said. That night, Grace wrote a letter, a will in her handwriting, leaving everything to her daughter. She placed it inside the drawer beside her bed, sealed with trembling fingers. By the next morning she couldn't get up. The cancer had spread, faster than hope, faster than prayer. Her breathing became shallow, her voice almost gone. Monica held her hand all through the night, her small fingers clutching the fading warmth. "Mummy, don't go," she whispered. "Please don't go." But sometimes love is not enough to keep someone alive. The hospital room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. At 2:47 a.m. that sound stopped. Grace's frail fingers slipped from her daughter's hand. Her chest fell still. Her face, once full of light, now peaceful, quiet, gone. The nurse rushed in, pressing buttons, shouting for help. But Monica already knew. She screamed once, a sound so raw it could break glass. Then silence again. Just a child sitting beside her mother's body, whispering through tears. "Mummy, wake up, please. I'll be good, please wake up." By morning, the news spread through the compound like wind through dry leaves. The widow was gone. And the miracle child, the one people used to envy, was now an orphan at 9 years old. Neighbors gathered. Some cried. Some only shook their heads. A few whispered, "How much can one little girl suffer?" But suffering like a shadow had decided to stay. The funeral came quickly. It was a gray morning, the kind where even the sky seems to mourn. Rain drizzled over the white tents. The pastor spoke about faith and destiny, but the words floated like smoke. Monica stood under an umbrella too big for her, dressed in a black gown that reached her ankles. She held a single rose in her hand, the same kind her mother used to plant by the garden. When the coffin was lowered, the rain fell harder. Each drop hit the soil like a drumbeat of loss. One grave was old, her father's. Beside it, a new one waited, her mother's. The ground swallowed both her parents. 2 lives, 2 worlds. And a little girl left standing between them. No one noticed her whisper. Her small lips trembled, voice fading into the rain. "Mama," she said, barely audible. "Who will love me now?" The rain had barely stopped when people began leaving the cemetery. Umbrellas folded. Black clothes shimmered with wetness. But Monica didn't move. She stood between 2 graves, her father's and her mother's, clutching the flower in her tiny hands, her eyes lost in a silence too deep for her age. Somebody tried to lead her away, but she whispered, "Mama, who will love me now?" No one answered. Because everyone there already knew, Love was about to leave her life completely. After the burial, the Kadri family gathered in the large living room of the mansion. The air was thick with the smell of perfume, grief, and quiet greed. Her grandmother, Mama Rahmath, old, gentle, and trembling, sat at the head of the table, her scarf neatly tied, eyes red from crying. Around her sat Grace's in-laws, uncles, aunties, cousins, all pretending to care, yet watching the walls like vultures circling their next meal. "Let's talk about Monica," the eldest uncle, Tund, said finally, adjusting his glasses. "She's still a small child. We must decide what's best for her." Mama Rahmath nodded slowly. "She's my only grandchild. Grace is gone. Chief is gone. I can take her, even if I have nothing." But her words hung in the air like smoke no one wanted to breathe. Greed sat at that table, smiling through false sympathy. One by one, the uncles and aunties spoke, each pretending concern, each hiding calculation behind trembling voices. "She's too young to handle money," one said. "Let's just keep the assets safe for her until she grows up," another added. Safe, that word echoed like a lie. Because everyone there knew they weren't protecting Monica's future. They were protecting their hunger. Mama Rahmath tried to speak again, her weak voice shaking. "Please don't let my grandchild suffer." Grace worked hard. Chief was a good man. Their property. But Tund cut her off. "Mama, no one wants her to suffer. We're only being responsible. Selling property now is risky. The economy is bad." Auntie Ruth nodded quickly. "Yes, Mama. We'll handle everything. We'll make sure she's fine." Fine. That word tasted bitter. Because when the meeting ended, they didn't go to comfort the child sleeping in the guest room. They went to Chief Kadri's study, the one he'd locked before his last trip, and began sorting through documents. By nightfall, decisions had been made. Not for Monica's sake, but for theirs. They would rent out the mansion, sell 2 of the cars, freeze the company accounts, until further notice. And the little girl, the only thing left of Chief and Grace Kadri's love, would be sent to the village. "It's better she stays with Mama Rahmath," they said. "She'll be safe there." But what they really meant was simple. Out of sight. Out of the way. A week later, a small bus stopped in front of the mansion. Inside it sat Monica, holding her tiny school bag, tears glistening in her eyes. She looked out through the window as the housekeeper closed the heavy iron gate. Her grandmother sat beside her, frail hands clutching her walking stick, trying to stay strong. "Don't cry, my child," she whispered. "We'll be fine." But her voice trembled. Because even she knew, she had no money, no strength, and no power against the wolves they had just left behind. The village was far. Hours of dusty roads, sunburnt trees, and silence. By the time they arrived, it was evening. The small mud house smelled of old wood and fire smoke. There was no generator, no television. Only a small kerosene lamp glowing weakly in the corner. That night, Monica sat quietly by her grandmother's side, staring into the flame. "Grandma," she asked softly, "why didn't Mummy and Daddy come back from heaven?" Mama Rahmath blinked fast, hiding her tears. "Because heaven needs good people too." She held the child close, the only thing she had left in the world. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. Monica adjusted slowly to village life, fetching water from the stream, washing clothes, cooking when her grandmother's back ached. But food was scarce. The roof leaked when it rained. And her once bright eyes began to lose their shine. Still, she smiled when she could. Her grandmother was her world now. Each night before bed, they prayed together, for strength, for mercy, for help that never came. Back in Lagos, Monica's school proprietress, Mrs. Bamadil, noticed her long absence. The teachers missed her brilliance, her laughter, her questions. At first they thought she had transferred. But when the term ended and no word came, Mrs. Bamadil grew uneasy. "She was too special a child to disappear like that," she said one afternoon, closing the register with a sigh. So she decided to find her. The journey to the village took almost a full day. Dust covered her car as she drove through narrow paths lined with mango trees and clay houses. When she finally found Mama Rahmath's home, she froze at the sight before her. A little girl sat outside on a low wooden stool, wearing a faded dress, her hair uncombed, her feet bare and cracked. She was washing plates in a bowl of muddy water. And yet, when she looked up, her eyes still held the same spark, tired but alive. "Monica!" Mrs. Bamadil called softly. The girl blinked in disbelief. "Ma'am!" Her voice cracked, part shock, part shame. The woman rushed to her, dropping to her knees. "Oh, my child, what have they done to you?" Inside she met Mama Rahmath, bent with age, her eyes cloudy with sadness. They spoke for a long time. And what Mrs. Bamadil heard broke her heart even more. No school. No help. No visits from relatives. Only promises that never came. That same evening, the proprietress made her decision. "I'm taking her with me," she said gently. "She deserves a chance to live again." Mama Rahmath wiped her tears. "Please take care of her. She's all I have." 2 days later they left. Small bag. Few clothes. No ceremony. No goodbye from the family who had stolen everything from her parents. As the car rolled down the narrow dirt road, Monica looked out through the window, the wind brushing against her thin face. She saw her uncles standing by the gate, arguing loudly over something. Then her eyes fell on the object behind them, a black SUV. Her father's car. They had just sold it. Her chest tightened. Her eyes burned. And as they disappeared from view, she whispered under her breath, "Daddy, they're selling everything you loved." The years slipped by like pages in a worn-out diary. The world moved on from the tragedy that took the Qadris, but Monica never did. She carried their memories like a flame that refused to die. From the dusty classroom floors of her village school to the bright halls of a city college, Monica's journey was not built on luck. It was built on pain. Every sleepless night, every tear she swallowed, every whisper of mockery from her cousins turned into a quiet promise. "I'll make you proud, Mama," she would whisper before sleeping beside her grandmother's mat. Her uncles and aunties fought endlessly over her parents' billion-naira empire. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Signatures became weapons. Houses were sold. Plots of land disappeared. Even the company her father built from nothing was split apart, piece by piece, by the same blood that once shared his table. But Monica didn't fight them. She was too young, too powerless, and yet too focused. While they were chasing money, she was chasing purpose. Every morning before dawn, she studied by lantern light. The flickering flame danced across her face as she whispered formulas, rehearsed essays, and solved problems no one thought she could. Her teachers watched her in awe. Her classmates admired her discipline, but few knew the depth of her pain. She wasn't just trying to pass exams. She was trying to prove that tragedy couldn't bury destiny. By the time Monica reached her final year in college, her name had become a symbol of brilliance. Professors spoke about her determination. Younger students whispered her story in admiration. And though she smiled at their praise, deep inside, her heart still ached for the voices she would never hear again. Her father's laughter, her mother's gentle encouragement. The day of the valedictory service came. The auditorium gleamed with decorations, ribbons, lights, and pride. Students sat in neatly pressed gowns, their families cheering from the crowd. Monica stood backstage, holding her speech, her palms trembling. She had been announced as the overall best graduating student. The moment the principal called her name, the hall erupted in applause. Students rose to their feet, clapping and shouting her name. But Monica walked slowly to the stage, her steps steady, her heart heavy. Tears blurred her vision as she faced the microphone. She looked at the crowd, at parents hugging their children, at smiles filled with love, and for a second she almost broke down. Then she took a deep breath and began. "I have no father to thank," she said softly. The hall fell silent. No mother to hug. "But I have their love in my heart, and that's enough." Her voice shook, but her words carried the weight of 10 lifetimes. I was born into comfort and lost everything before I turned 10. But I learned something: that pain can either destroy you or define you. I chose to let it define me. There was no sound, only sniffles. Teachers wiped their eyes. Even the principal looked down, his glasses fogged with tears. As the crowd rose again in thunderous applause, somewhere across the city, her relatives gathered for another meeting, not to celebrate her success, but to divide what little was left of her parents' empire. "Sell the Lecky house," one said. "The land in Abeokuta too," another added. Their laughter echoed like the sound of greed devouring legacy. None of them even remembered that somewhere a young woman, their blood, was standing on a stage proving that the Kadri name still meant something. When the event ended, Monica returned to the village with her award plaque resting on her lap. The road was dark, the air cool and quiet. She watched the stars through the window, whispering to herself, "I did it, Mama. I did it, Daddy." Her grandmother was waiting at the small compound when she arrived. The old woman sat by the fire, her frail body wrapped in a shawl. She had been coughing all week, but she refused to lie down. When Monica approached, she smiled weakly, her voice trembling. "My child," she whispered, her hand shaking as she reached out to touch her granddaughter's cheek. "Your parents' spirits will not rest until you rise." The sun had not yet risen when Monica opened her eyes. The morning air was cold and sharp, creeping through the cracks of her grandmother's bamboo window. She reached for her toothbrush and stepped outside, her feet touching the cool, damp earth. Roosters crowed in the distance. The smell of smoke from early fires drifted through the air. Life in the village was simple, quiet and slow, but behind its peace lived the sound of forgotten dreams. Monica brushed her teeth beside the clay pot that held rainwater. Her thoughts were far away, drifting between memories of her parents and the uncertain future that awaited her. Then she saw him, a young boy sprinting down the narrow path, clutching a handful of papers. His slippers slapped against the ground as he ran past her. "Hey!" Monica called, her voice echoing across the morning stillness. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" The boy stopped, panting hard. "City Hall," he said, holding up the papers. "There's a scholarship exam today. The car from the ministry is already waiting." For a moment Monica just stood there, toothbrush in hand, foam still on her lips. A scholarship exam. The words rang in her ears like a whisper from fate. Without thinking, she dropped the brush and ran inside. She didn't even change her clothes. Her nightwear hung loosely on her thin frame. She grabbed her old slippers, the left strap already torn, and dashed after the boy. The red dust of the village rose behind her like a storm as she ran barefoot through the rough paths. Her heart pounded, her breath came in gasps, but her eyes were bright, determined. She had missed opportunities before because she had no one to tell her where to look. Not this time. When they reached the city hall, Monica's heart almost failed her. The compound was crowded. Boys and girls in neat uniforms, shoes polished, faces glowing with confidence. Their parents waited outside in cars and taxis, giving last-minute advice. Monica looked down at herself, hair uncombed, clothes wrinkled, feet dusty. She felt small, invisible. But when the registration officer looked up, Monica stepped forward anyway. "Please, sir," she said softly. "I want to write the exam." The man frowned. "Where's your form?" "I don't have one," she whispered. "But I can fill it now." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "There's one extra form left," he said finally. "Take it. Be quick." Monica borrowed a pen from a stranger and filled the paper with trembling hands. The hall was silent as the exam began. She closed her eyes for a second, breathed deeply, and remembered her mother's words. "Monica, never let people's noise drown your destiny." Then she wrote. She wrote like her life depended on it, because it did. Questions that made others pause came to her like whispers. Equations, essays, comprehension. Every page carried her pain, her hunger, her faith. By the time the invigilator said, "Pens down," her fingers were shaking, but her heart was calm. Outside, students laughed and gossiped. Some pointed at her, giggling at her nightwear and messy hair. One girl whispered loudly, "Who comes to an exam looking like a house girl?" Monica smiled faintly. They didn't know what she had been through. They didn't know that she had walked through loss, hunger, and humiliation to sit in that chair. She walked home barefoot, her slippers torn apart from the run. But in her chest, hope had returned, small, fragile but alive. 2 weeks later, a crowd gathered at the village square. A white van from the Ministry of Education pulled up, and a man stepped out holding a microphone. He read the list of successful candidates. Dozens of names passed. None was Monica's, until the very last one. And the overall winner, Miss Monica Caudry, has been awarded a full government scholarship to study in the United Kingdom. All expenses covered. The crowd gasped, then silence, then cheers exploded. Children ran around her shouting her name. The same villagers who once pitied her now clapped and danced. The boy she followed stood beside her, smiling sadly. His name wasn't on the list. Monica turned to him and said softly, "Thank you. If you hadn't run that morning, I wouldn't have known." He nodded. "Maybe that's why I ran," he said, eyes glistening. That evening, Monica sat beside her grandmother, tears of gratitude rolling down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of destiny touching her again. The night wind blew gently, carrying the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. She looked up at the stars, whispering, "Mama, Daddy, your daughter is going abroad." But not everyone shared her joy. When the news reached the city, when her uncles heard that Monica had won a scholarship, they gathered again around their polished dining table, wearing false smiles. Not to celebrate, but to stop her. Evening settled over the village like a heavy sigh. Smoke curled from distant huts, the air thick with the scent of roasted yam and firewood. But inside Grandma's small house, peace was shattered by the sound of angry voices. Her relatives had come, the same ones who once smiled at Monica's parents' table, now standing in the doorway like vultures circling what was left. "You'll let her go and she'll forget you," Uncle Peter barked, his voice echoing through the room. "These government people will use her. Girls who travel abroad come back as prostitutes." Monica froze, her chest rising and falling in fear. She had never seen so much venom disguised as concern. Aunt Ruth folded her arms. "She's still a child. What does she know about living alone in another country? You'll regret this, Mama." The grandmother, old and frail, sat silently in her wooden chair, eyes half closed, breathing slowly. Her fingers trembled on her lap, but her voice, when it came, was firm. "Enough." The room went quiet. The fire crackled in the corner, throwing shadows on the mud walls. Monica fell on her knees beside the old woman. Tears ran freely down her cheeks as she clasped her grandmother's hands. "Grandma, please," she begged, voice breaking. "This is my only chance. Me go. Let me make something of myself." Her sobs filled the room. Outside, a night bird cried, long, mournful, distant. The old woman's eyes glistened as she looked at her granddaughter, the last living piece of her daughter's heart. She cupped Monica's face in her wrinkled palms. "Go, my child," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't look back. Let the world see what my daughter gave birth to." The relatives scoffed and murmured, but Grandma's words silenced them all. Even greed knew when love had spoken. That night, after everyone left, the house fell into soft stillness. The oil lamp flickered weakly beside them as Grandma began to sing, an old Yoruba lullaby, one she used to sing to Monica's mother long ago. Her voice trembled, but it carried something eternal, sorrow and strength woven together. Monica lay beside her, her head resting on Grandma's chest. They cried quietly, holding each other. Tears ran into the wrinkles of age and the innocence of youth. They didn't cry from pain anymore. They cried from love, from memories that could never be replaced. When dawn broke, a car horn echoed outside the compound. The scholarship officials had arrived. Monica's bag sat by the door, a small bag carrying her entire life. She stood trembling. The moment she had dreamed of was finally here, but her feet felt heavy, as if the earth itself didn't want to let her go. Grandma rose slowly from her chair, leaning on her cane. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. "My child," she said softly, "remember, the world can take your name, your home, even your peace. But never let it take your truth." Monica threw her arms around her and held her tight, tighter than she ever had before. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered, tears soaking her grandmother's scarf. "I'll make you proud." The old woman nodded, unable to speak. She placed her trembling hand on Monica's head and whispered a final prayer in Yoruba, voice breaking with emotion. As the car drove away, Grandma stood by the dusty road. Her white hair glowed in the early sunlight. She waved with frail hands until the vehicle disappeared behind the trees. "Go well, my child," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the wind. "Go and live the life they tried to steal." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered one last prayer. May her mother's spirit walk beside her. Hours later, Monica sat by the airplane window, staring at the clouds outside. The engines roared beneath her feet as the plane climbed higher into the sky. She looked down at the shrinking world below, the village, the rivers, the lands that once held her sorrow. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass. For the first time in years she smiled, not with joy but with purpose. She whispered under her breath, "I'm coming for everything they took from me." If you followed Monica's journey from the warmth of love to the depths of loss, and finally to this powerful moment of hope, thank you for watching till the end. This is just the beginning. Because in part 2, Monica will return, not as the broken child they abandoned, but as the woman destiny rebuilt. Storm is coming, and every greedy hand that fed on her parents' legacy will soon face the truth. Subscribe if you believe justice may be slow, but it always finds its way home.